Well, welcome everybody. It's really great to have such a great showing for another Nickle at noon, and I welcome you all on this really cold and blustery day. I think we're all in the best places possible. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So welcome, and it's wonderful to be here. A reminder that this is Nickle at Noon online. We have been online since September, and it's looking like we'll be online until April. But we've got lots of fabulous talks and presentations lined up for you every Thursday, 12 to 1. For a live presentation, and then of course most of these are recorded and posted to our YouTube channel, sorry. And you can follow us on your favorite social media platform, or you can subscribe to our mailing list. We still have a digital mailing list. Just contact Marla or I if you're interested. We'll ask that for the duration of the talk, you keep your microphones on mute. This is just so that we don't have conflicting conversations. And we will hold questions until the end of Dick's presentation, please. You're welcome to use the chat. Marla or I will try and address your questions, or we will just hold them until the end. Please be aware that this is recorded and will be added actually to our YouTube channel. Participant names and the chat will not be included in the recording. However, if you speak, your voice will be likely present on the finished recording. And my last slide is, oops, well, a few wrong names there. It is some introductions. I'm not Marina Fisher. Not the last time I checked. I'm Michelle Hardy. I'm one of the curators with Nickle Galleries. And Marla Halstad, who is right there, thank you, Marla, is managing the back end. Marla is one of our resident wizards. She does whatever's needed, and that is quite a lot right now. So thank you in advance to Marla. Today's presentation, I'm always thrilled to introduce Dick Averns. It is held and planned specifically for the Bell Let's Talk Day. Dick's talk is called Prescriptions for Art. It's very apropos of this time that we're in, and I can't think of a more capable or knowledgeable speaker on this topic. And just a few words about Dick. He is something of a Renaissance man. If you know him personally, then you'll certainly agree. He's an artist, a curator, a writer, and an educator. He's an artist with a rich multidisciplinary practice that's included stints as a Canadian war artist. He's also particularly committed to community engagement and has a deep and abiding interest in mental health, or more specifically, mental wellness, and the potency of art to affect change. Diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome in adulthood, Dick's art and mental wellness public art project, Recognition, Validation, and Reassurance, contributed to his winning the 2020 Mayor's Award for Healing Through the Arts, which is a tremendous, tremendous recognition of Dick's work in this area. His recent art practice continues to probe how mental and physical spaces are valued and exchanged, and he works as a colleague of mine. He's a curatorial coordinator for the University of Calgary's Founders Gallery, located at the Military Museums. And it's just such a pleasure to welcome you, Dick. And I will stop sharing and turn this over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much. If you could give me the thumbs up, please, Michelle, that you can hear me and that you can see my screen, that would be great. So here we go, without further ado. Before I die, there's lots of things I'd like to do and say. And that's perhaps the case for many of us. And so it's a great pleasure to be here for Nickle at Noon and today's topic, Prescriptions for Art, with the subtitle of Bell Let's Talk Day in Action. And so in welcoming you all here today, I really want to be able to make sure that for those of you that aren't familiar with Bell Let's Talk Day, that I'm able to give you a little bit of an introduction for that. And then I will be covering 7 prescriptions for art. I will be talking about commissioned portraits, rule-based art, art multiples, process art, relational aesthetics, social practice, and finishing up with social prescribing, and then moving to our Q&A. There is a logical sequence to the way in which I've put together these so-called prescriptions. You'll also find probably some artists you know, maybe some that you don't, and we'll also see some artists cropping up a number of different times. So thank you very much. As Michelle said, please put your questions into the chat session and she'll be monitoring that. I won't be looking at that myself, so I look forward to seeing what you might have to add at the end though. All right then, so let's start off with Bell Let's Talk Day. For those of you that still take the daily newspaper, here I have today's Calgary Herald, and it says that today is Bell Let's Talk Day, the big ad that you have on the front page there. And so this is a Canada-wide sponsored event to promote awareness, and it's built on 4 strategies, 4 key pillars to address community mental wellness. And the 4 pillars are anti-stigma, care and access, research, and workplace health. And this is an initiative of Bell Canada. Simple ways to start a conversation. Language. I'll be talking about language in a number of different ways, and more specifically towards the end of the conversation here today around the word and usage of mental. But just talking about things can make a difference. And the examples that are given here by Bell Let's Talk Day, I can certainly remember people being referred to as schizos, whether overtly or covertly, and whether or not somebody did or didn't have a particular condition. Of course, today we'd want to talk about a person with schizophrenia, and likewise, we wouldn't want to refer to people as crazies, but we might talk about a person with mental illness. A lot of the audience that we're welcoming are very well educated. I do hope you learned something today. And so being kind, we've heard a lot about that during the COVID times. Listening and asking and talking about things. We don't hold things in, we let them out. We invariably feel better about it. So what's been going on with Bell Let's Talk Day over 10 years? So big impact. If you have a Bell account and you send an email, a text today, then they will be donating funds to this campaign. And we'll see in the first year, they raised over $66 million, a tremendous amount. And over the last 10 years, they've raised $154 million. And you can see there's been literally billions of interactions. And some of these are media driven. People may not overtly be realizing that today when they're making these connections with people, that money is going to support this event, but it really is very meaningful. And so where do the funds go? Well, already $113 million of that total amount has been committed to mental health initiatives, and there's been 775 community funded grants. I can let you know that there's been 3 or 4 different pillars that Bell have supported. Post-secondary is currently one of those. A lot of my own research has concentrated on youth, and particularly with my experience working as a post-secondary educator. That's been a real focus for trying to assist students and those that are feeling the stresses of going to school and perhaps not having the employment or the supports that they need. We can see that children and youth has been a big priority for Bell Let's Talk. Indigenous communities, there was a funding silo over the last couple of years that was specifically dedicated towards diversity. That particular funding envelope is not open currently. And the Military Family Support Unit, Michelle mentioned my work as a former war artist and my work at the military museums with the UFC Founders Gallery. There's actually an exhibit that I'll be working on for a year or so down the road that looks at military and the health aspect of people in the armed services. So that gives you an overview for Bell Let's Talk Day with providing of access to mental health services for a wide range of people. I will add that the post-secondary fund is still open for applications, and the community fund is still open for applications too. The fourth silo that is funded by Bell Let's Talk is applied research. The presentation I'm giving today will touch briefly on aspects of research. I can add that the research funding from Bell Let's Talk is by invitation only. So again, that's not one that you can apply for, but two silos that are broadly open for people to access. So without further ado, let's talk about commissioned portraits. Many of you be familiar with the notion that representation of ourselves goes back thousands of years. It's also, of course, been a mainstay of commissioned art. Whether or not you would have thought that the work behind me on the walls here are actually portraits or not, that's open to question. I will make the argument that in fact they are. Very often, of course, we're talking about capturing a likeness or perhaps recording history in some way, particularly before photography. And we often find that, again, historically, that portraiture has invoked status or power within cultural context. So in and of themselves, I would say that commissions form a prescription both as production and as a means of rendering conceptually based content. And that would be the case, again, with Mary's work behind us here. Let's take a look at some examples, and I'm breaking these down into a number of different categories, which I'll expand upon. This work is actually by an unknown artist, and as it is many times, you find a photograph in the street, you don't know who it is and who took it. We could find the same here with this family portrait, going back just over 400 years of the Chumley ladies. So it is indeed spelled Cholmondeley, but it's pronounced Chumley. They look very familiar to one another. It's believed that these are sisters of Lord and Lady Chumley. Art historians have established that they're not necessarily identical twins, nor necessarily are their children. There's different eye colors for both the two women and the two babies that are here. But clearly a focus on family and wellness, certainly stature with the large ruffs and the necklaces that we see there. Kind of interesting that they're both there in bed next to one another, but it's a warm and early painting example of a family portrait. Jumping forward 300 years, here we have Petra Gill, and this is Eric Gill's daughter. Some of you may be familiar with Eric Gill for a number of different reasons, and there's a coded prescription in this slide that I'm showing here to you currently. Perhaps best known for his etchings, amazing lithographs, also an architect. And in this particular work, it fits within the category of family. I've chosen some darker images to put interspersed with today's presentation. And what wasn't widely known about Eric Gill until more recent times was that some of his predilections and interests in the human figure were actually extremely dark. So although this is a rendering of his daughter, and particularly a study of hair, the averted gaze, which appears in a number of her works, actually part of a hidden and darker history of incest within the family, and that Eric Gill, perhaps not best known for having sex with his dog. This is Bell Let's Talk Day. We need to be able to communicate and talk about these things if we're going to be able to address the dark side and move forward. One of the things that Eric Gill is known for, and this is the subtext in the portrait, pun intended with the subtext, Eric Gill's name is written in the Gill Sans font, and that's the full Gill Sans. The rest is the Gill Sans Regulus. So he's actually cropping up in many of our lives every day through his name as a typographic portrait. The Grand Manner. Here we really are looking at the aspect of vivacity, vitality, a joie de vivre for those that are depicted here. Sir Joshua Reynolds, a well-known portrait painter for the landed gentry. And we see Colonel Ackland here with the arches. This is from the Tate collection. And the Grand Manner is really about mannerism and expressing myth and intermingling it with one's own identity, and very predominant genre if we were to go back 250 years. Friends crop up regularly within portraiture, and again with Bell Let's Talk Day, we're blessed, hopefully, to have some friends within our circle. But what about meeting new friends? Well, Thomas Eakins was well known for not just relying on his family, but those around him, friends, neighbors that he would bring in as subjects for his portraiture. I don't have it on authority that Elizabeth Crowell was a friend or a neighbor, but I think this nevertheless conjures a relationship between a dog, another individual, and the artist. And what better way than to be able to expand the prescription for one's creativity by expanding one's social circle. And again, that would relate to the theme of mental wellness. Elaborating on the portrait, this was an influential book for me that I purchased with actually funds. I remember it was from my aunt who'd given me money for my birthday, and I was just in my second year at art school and purchased this at the National Portrait Gallery. I should add that this is the National Portrait Gallery in the UK, because we have been not well blessed with the prescription for art in this country for our own national portraits. That was something that, although prescribed for a new gallery in the former US Embassy, it hit the death knell with the inception of the Stephen Harper government. This book was actually republished in 2006 for an exhibition, and it's in reference to some of the categories that I've alluded to of family, friends, that this book explicates on categories also such as the muse. And Lucian Freud is featured in the portrait now. Here we have a girl with a striped nightshirt, and the broad gestural brushstrokes that Freud is well known for, very representational here. There's a real focus on the intimacy of using such large strokes up close. And Cecilia Paul was in fact a student of Freud's when I believe he was teaching at the Slade in the 70s, and they then became lovers. She then bore his child, and the muse has continued to be a rich subject in the prescription of portraiture. Which leads us to the idea of lovers and self-portraits. And here we have a multi-layered portrait and self-portrait, if you will, of John and Yoko Ono. This is after he'd left his first partner in the late 60s. And here we have John and Yoko with the plastic Ono band. So we see the representation of artists in the name that's on the vinyl. We also have the colored vinyl as an object, and the title of the record, Listen to the Snow Falling, which very apropos for this time of year. We're locked up in the cold, but sometimes quiet can be restorative. And I think it's important, again, on Bell Let's Talk Day, to not confuse isolation with solitude. Solitude can be like more of a choice if we look at it positively and in the right way. A more specific self-portrait here by the well-known Jenny Saville. And this work, highly codified, clearly she's railing against histories of the male gaze or an indulgence in the female body as something to be visually ravaged or exoticized. She's boldly addressing in a more nuanced way some feminist iconography through the text on the paintings. This is one of the early examples. It's actually from her degree show. And you'd need to be able to read the text in a mirror to actually unpack it. And she did, in fact, show this work in front of a mirror before it was purchased by Charles Saatchi, who snapped up all his work. I was actually very fortunate to attend the opening of the Young British Artists 3 exhibition in 1993, I believe it was, in which Jenny Saville's work was featured alongside that of Simon Callery and Simon English. And in following her work, clearly she's risen to great heights. And what better way on Bell Let's Talk Day than to celebrate her courage. Look at the anguish in the way that the fingers are gripping into the flesh upon her thighs, and rightly received the recognition and credit critically that she deserves. This work, and the image I'm showing you is from the Sotheby's catalog, was sold for $6.8 million to a gallery and museum in Asia. Rounding out the photographic commissions section for our prescriptions for art, contemporary photography. Jürgen Teller, well known as both a fashion photographer and a fine art photographer. So the choice here of Vivienne Westwood, a doyenne of fashion, seems very fitting to be able to include her here. And The choices of color, you'll see the palettes between her striped dress and the purple flowers in the background, the white hair, the white rose, the beautiful pale peach of the rose on her right, and matching with her cardigan. So lots of formal considerations that might go on the record from the sorts of considerations you'd see in paintings going back much further, but this rounds out our prescriptions for art in terms of portraits. So in looking at some of the symbolism in that last work that you might consider symbolism often a rule, let's look at rule-based art. So this is where we have an artist proposing terms of reference, a criteria that you follow as a roadmap, and this will determine the process, subject, and then the content of the art. An early example, text-based art here with Lawrence Weiner, and sorry about the spelling mistake there of Weiner. Maybe he does at times, I'm not sure. But the artist may construct the piece, number one. The piece may be fabricated, number two. The piece need not be built, number three. And that each of these tenets are equal and consistent with the intent of the artist. The decision then rests upon the receiver on the occasion of receivership as to how the work will be interpreted. So clearly a set of rules there, very conceptual. John Baldessari, I will not make any more boring art. This prescription, of course, would be based on writing of lines as a punishment meted out by a teacher to perhaps a misbehaving schoolgirl or schoolboy or schoolthey. Originally, Baldessari was due to conduct workshops at NASCAD in Halifax in 1971. They didn't have the money, and so he sent this up as a task, and students were instructed to write this on the gallery wall many times over. The work lives on. For many an artist that I will not make any more boring art. When it comes to lines, of course, they can be repetitious. The work circulates as wallpaper shows. Personally, it's true that I did get meted out lots of lines for my misbehaving at school, but I also had a healthy income from writing lines for other students as well. Mario Mertz with the Fibonacci sequence. Here we have a public artwork. For those that aren't familiar with Fibonacci, it is that never-ending rule of adding two numbers together. So 1 + 1 = 2, and then 1 + 2 = 3, 2 + 3 = 5, and so forth. And another rule, what about that of breaking rules? Well, David Garneau, known to many in Western Canada and Calgary, November the 16th, regularly going out and addressing John Macdonald, Prime Minister of Canada, known for, sadly, some of his less than just treatment of Indigenous and Métis individuals. Garneau, as a Métis artist himself, reading a proclamation every year to Macdonald to address the injustices to Louis Riel and his execution. And we see the Métis sash placed around the head, and then we see cloaked and hooded Garneau reading his letter to Macdonald every year. So personally set of constructed rules, also addressing breaking the rules and of course indigeneity. Yoko Ono cropping up again here from the portrait, so you'll see the theme coming together. We have her grapefruit, and this was a compendium of conceptual art instructions, such as, carefully chosen for being in the museum today, collecting piece number 2. Break a contemporary museum into pieces with the means you have chosen. Collect the pieces and put them together again with glue. Not necessarily practical, of course it happens, and there's a kind of sense of fun to these rules that can be shared. And this brings me closer to taking a look at the work behind us here of Mary Shannon Will. I've referenced already that I considered these to be paintings, so we have here JAW's colors. The title would actually read Jaws colors in capitals. The text that I have up on the screen is courtesy of Mary and Nickle Galleries here for this current exhibition, where she wrote down the rules for a system of paintings with geometric glass shape in their centers. And she's asking Myrna, Dennis, Marianne, Robin, JAW to choose colors, 2 that they really like and 2 that they do not like. And then selecting matching tubes of paint as close as possible, and then putting them together to create the artworks, and then using the letters in order from the name within the titles. And so this work in the middle is DJ's colors. And this work here, further to my left, perhaps your right on the screen, is as colors. And of course, sometimes one might think of meh as meh. So the work is codified in the title as MEH, if you were to look at the gallery wall, but we can see that it's actually Myrna Elizabeth Harvey, and then all the colors are broken down. So a clear set of rule-based arts within this current exhibition, works produced between 2015 and 2019. This brings us on to the next prescription for art, art multiples. We can see that Mary is applying her rule multiple times over for different people, but all the works are different. But with an art multiple, there will be an addition and reproduction of pretty much identical works. And this is to facilitate relatively cheap, easy, and widespread distribution, often using issue-based works. So the level of the craft and skill is not paramount so much as it is the subject and the audience that is intended to receive these art multiples. So I have here the well-known duo Ian and Ingrid Baxter. Ingrid is no longer part of the NE Thing company. Ian is now Ian Baxter, and that ampersand that you see in the middle has moved to the end of his name, and that's because he thinks of everything that he does as being in conjunction with somebody else. There's always an and or an other. So in this particular instance from 1971, the Anything Company, which of course is talking about art being anything. So art is all over, it is all around. But at the same time, of course, art is all over, it's finished. It's about breaking down these boundaries and contesting the possibility of art being anything. And these buttons were widely distributed. Another form of distribution, Steve Mcqueen, the well-known black artist from the UK, deployed as a war artist to Iraq in the early 2000s, had hoped to create a work of video art in Baghdad, was only able to get as far as Basra before he was brought home. I interviewed staff at the Imperial War Museum not long after his deployment there to find out what was happening. They were optimistic that he would be redeployed to complete his work. The military and the circumstances on the ground didn't work out that way. And so ultimately, Mcqueen created this set of art multiples that are bound really by stricture and rules beyond his control. You see the works displayed here. They're individual artist stamps, and each one depicts a fallen British soldier. These works were created with the permission of the families, and they provided the photographs. The work was incredibly popular. It was exhibited around the United Kingdom. The title for the work, Queen and Country, there's obviously wordplay on his own name. There's the service of fighting for Queen and Country. There's the currency of the realm, that normally it's the Queen's head that appears on all postage stamps. In this instance, it's replaced by these fallen soldiers. There was a wide multiple signed petition to actually create a currency of the realm, which a postage stamp is, and make these real stamps so that the art multiple could circulate legitimately, but the government and the post office fought against that, if you will. This is one of the most popular art multiple works of recent times within the UK, and has actually been bought by the Art Fund for posterity for the nation. This work by the well-known Brazilian female artist Nelly Azevedo, Monumento Minimo, or the minimum monument. What we see here are numerous figures reproduced as art multiples, sitting on the steps. In the one sense, you could look with the photograph of these fallen soldiers here, a reproduction thereof, next to the statues that you can now see are ice and that they are melting away, that it is a bit like a war monument that, and of course, ultimately we will all disappear. More widely, the work is recognized as dealing with climate change and global warming, but a great example of the art multiple, and one that can be reproduced multiple times in multiple locations. So the next prescription is process art, and we're talking here about where the process of the art making isn't hidden. It remains prominent as an aspect of the completed work of art. And again, like with the art multiple, perhaps the art object itself is not necessarily as important. And so the Tate will say to us here from their glossary that the process is more important, or is the main part of the work, of the subject behind the work, rather than just dealing with objecthood. And again, the Mary Shannon Will works here are highly process oriented. Each of these color strips is a tiny bead of paint alongside another color, and they're interwoven. It's like impasto out of the tube. So let's look at some other examples of process art. Back to Yoko Ono with her grapefruit. Here's one for all of us that we can indulge in the process, the tuna sandwich piece, the tuna fish sandwich. So imagine 1,000 suns in the sky at the same time. Let them shine for 1 hour. Then let them gradually melt into the sky. Make one tuna fish sandwich and eat. 1964, spring. So I identify with this because that's when I, landed upon this good earth. I really like the way that it implicates, again, the gallery into the notion of this work today gets exhibited widely in galleries, but when you look at it in conjunction with the previous piece about breaking up the gallery or the museum and consuming it, I think that this is very fun. And in terms of the thematic of Yoko Ono, I want to draw attention to the current exhibition, and an organization that we partnered with here in town, Contemporary Calgary, have extended their current Yoko Ono exhibit, for those of you that have not been able to see it, through to March. So we're hoping that the gallery downtown there will open again soon. Just last week, there was an online discussion about Yoko Ono's grapefruit, hosted by Dave Diamond. And you can go to YouTube and see this. It says that the date was January 19th, 2021. And whether that's a deliberate mistake, whether it's Man Ray getting into the act, or whether it's just another conceptual process that's really a typography issue, who's to say? But I do want to draw attention to the possibility for those that are interested to explore the work of Yoko Ono. Then there's the opportunity for both this, and other programs on YouTube that have been recently posted by Contemporary Calgary. Let's look at some more formal aspects of the prescription of art as process. Here we have Richard Serra, somewhat of a grandfather of object-based formalists and metal sculptures from the 1950s, 60s, and on. Some of you may have seen the fabulous sculpture that he has in the departure lounge for the international departures area at the Toronto Pearson Airport. With this work called the Gutter Corner Splash, Night Shift, again, often with process, there's a title that tells you a little bit more. He poured molten lead into the corner join of the floor and the 3 walls, and then would let it cool. And once it would set, he would break out the lead and pull it back like a wave into the room. So it's really about the materiality and the process of foundry-based object making, transforming the process into the objects themselves. And to be clear, process art isn't everybody's cup of tea, but this gives you another prescription, if you will, to art about art. Continuing with the theme of lead, we have here Jochen Goetz and Esther Schalew-Goetz with their Monument Against Fascism from 1986. And this is a lead-covered column in Berlin, and of course, before the fall of the Berlin Wall and the raising of the Iron Curtain, the dropping of the curtain. And in this particular work, individuals, members of the public, were invited, and you'll see a text panel on the right-hand side that was in multiple different languages, to create their own inscription against fascism, to literally put their own process into a living object. The work then, once it moved up to a height where it couldn't be reached any further, the column would be lowered down into the ground. There was a pre-made shaft, and ultimately the work was lowered all the way down into the ground, and it still exists there with just a tablet on the top. So the process really about also removing the obelisk, the phallic symbol of power, as part of a socially mandated prescription for art. Andy Goldsworthy, a beautiful lyrical work here. There's been lots of talk around Bell Let's Talk Day this year, with the challenge of COVID and the lockdown, to be able to find a renewed connection with nature. I'm sure many of us would love to get back to those warm autumn days that we had most recently. And the process for Goldsworthy, also rule-based, in that he is known for relying on natural materials to piece his works together. He doesn't weld them or bolt them. He uses nature and balance. So these sycamore leaves stitched together with stalks and hung from a tree. You can imagine chancing across this work. Ultimately, it was left to the winds of nature to take the work away again, and clearly heavily process oriented, and a great exemplar of a prescription for art that has a rich layer of wellness to it. If we were to move forward now to something that's a little bit more political, then Francis Alice, living in Mexico, Belgian born, sometimes doing something poetic can become political. And sometimes doing something political can become poetic. And we see him here at a border post. You'll see the Star of David flag on the right and the uniform IDF soldier. He's actually recreating the green line, literally and conceptually, by walking the line of demarcation from the ceasefire at the end of the First Arab-Israeli War, or for some, of course, the War of Independence, 1947, 1948. And the work is very ephemeral, but the process, again, of marcation, demarcation, temporality, and the challenges of conflict underpinning the particular choice of this work, again, today for Bell Let's Talk Day. A number of the works that I've touched on are highly relational. They're about relationships in the last work there, of course, between nation states, between religions, between histories and economies, very much tied up in that. Likewise with the work of Goldsworthy, with implication of nature. And so this leads me to my next prescription for art, relational aesthetics. And this is a term coined by the critic and curator, Nicholas Bourdieu. And I should add that he created this term based on observing tendencies in art practices through the 1990s. It wasn't prescriptive in and of something he conceived himself. So the emphasis really is that the relationship between audience and artwork is the content, rather than the content being contained within the discrete form of an art object alone. So you can see the connection there again between the idea of, say, process-based art or rule-based art, where a set of constructs beyond objecthood take primacy as the prescription. Diane Basado, with her project Touching 1,000 People, really a very subtle work where she set out to interact with people and to feel a touch, or to touch other people in an unexpected way. Audiences with this work were invariably unaware that they were implicated in the work, but of course, proximity to people. I mean, at the moment, again, the idea of touching fresh fruit and someone's hand at the same time in a supermarket would, have a very loaded connotation to it. The work was widely documented, and so this sense of touching 1,000 people, I think we all know that if we are physically touched, we often feel that emotionally in some way. Of course, the idea if one was like touched like this, the impact of it is perhaps not what you want, but to be touched or caressed would give us a very different kind of emotion. And that's really what's behind this relational work by Diane Basado. The 20,000 Snowdrops project was one that was more overtly implicating audiences. She gave out thousands and thousands of snowdrop bulbs actually here in Calgary at Nuit Blanche in 2014. And this is for audiences to then to take something, return it to nature and wait for the blooms to follow, which can be quite a long time with snowdrops, I have to say. Let's look at this work in terms of exchange, and I highlight that the date here, 1991, could be seen as somewhat of a retro diction in that it does predate the term relational aesthetics, but I think it's a forebearer and an important marker for the evolution of relational aesthetics. We do see portraiture coming back up here again, and we see multiples coming back up here. We see processes coming back up here, and so this work really does, I think, provide a great exemplar of all the different prescriptions that I'm putting together here. A Mapplethorpe photograph on the wall behind that you might notice. And so we know that this is a portrait of somebody because it's there in the title. It's Untitled, but brackets, a portrait of Ross in LA. And these are candies, and audience members are invited to eat one of the candies and consume it. The total pile of candies is equivalent to the weight of 175 pounds, which was the ideal weight of Ross, Gonzalez Torres' lover, who passed away. And if you want to find out more about it, then do go to the Art Institute of Chicago's website. And the idea was that the work would constantly be replenished and regenerated so that even though Ross had passed away, his weight would stay the same. The flip side, of course, is that you could imagine that the weight of Ross has been consumed by audience members, and then there's just the empty wrappers there. Either way, there's a form of like transubstantiation and consumption within this work, which I find extremely evocative. Rick Tiravenilla, perhaps one of the best known relational aesthetic artists, born in Argentina, spent time living in Thailand, a real fusion of cultures, particularly a non-Western focus with his work and the idea of sharing food and breaking bread together. And so this work was really about the process of going to the gallery and the food being made and, again, literally consuming it and eating it. Challenging for many people to think of this as art, but nevertheless, we do see a commodification of it that goes beyond that initial work, that the trappings, the very deliberate framing of the walls there without anything on them as part of a process that here we see now, oh, it's the setup for the cafe at the Museum of Modern Art. Returning to Calgary here, the Kandahar. And so this is from a work by Theo Sims, where the relational component of exchange is again around socializing and, in this instance, drinking. Of course, with Bell Let's Talk Day, being together with people is really important, and reaching out to people is really important. This is actually a transplant, identically, of a pub from the Kandahar in Belfast. And for those that didn't get to experience it at a number of different settings, Wayne Bearwalt first conceived this work as a venue on behalf of the artist as a test run for the Montreal Biennial. It then was at the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver. It was back here for Nuit Blanche, but this is the first iteration. And there you see the outside of the Kandahar and the process laid bare for how that site of relational aestheticization has occurred. So the penultimate reference point today will be social practice. You'll see this evolution between these different prescriptions, and with social practice, again, it's community-based, but the content is really shaped much more by participants for themselves and the benefit of a broader community. Less prescriptive on the part of the artist, just getting artists to help make something that's already been totally prescribed. And again, the Tate glossary here.
Attention, please. The polling session for computer workstations and study spaces will be ending in 15 minutes.
I apologize for the interruption.
If you are using a workstation to save or print your work, all users please sanitize your workspace before the afternoon arrives. Thank you.
There we go. Social interaction there for some other event that's going on here. The Taylor Family Digital Library open for select events and security and health protocols, making sure the numbers of the people in the building don't exceed 15% and that people are moved on by the time they have to. And so it is that, again, returning to the glossary, the socially engaged practice that is key. Again, that's how we're able to operate here today. And so this holds more importance than the object, and we're talking about the collaborative act is one thing, but social engagement is really where we're at. So it was my title plate. Candy Chang, born in Hong Kong, residing still, I think, in Canada, also an actress. And this work has been recreated 4,000 times, multiple languages. I literally stumbled across the work, not far from the Tabernacle in Salt Lake City in Utah on a road trip in 2018. And my daughter was really taken with this particular work and jumped right into it. Obviously, there's a form of self-portrait that's going on here. It is rule-based. There's a process art. The work exists as multiples, and this continuum of different prescriptions, again, for the construct of Bell Let's Talk Day, and creating a sense of cohesion between individuals and a stronger community. I think this work is a real exemplar. So I'll read a few for you. Before I die, I want to be happy. Before I die, I want to eat the rich. Before I die, I want to see more concerts. That's really relevant for today, hey? Before I die, I want to hold a sloth. Before I die, I want to get a tattoo. It's really a very rich work that's very broad. Coming to the home front, I'm taking the liberty of interspersing in the social practice here the project that Michelle mentioned in the introduction. So there's a theme to this with the recent and ongoing project Recognition, Validation, Reassurance. And it's based on the premise that if an individual receives recognition, they're likely to feel more validated, and validation leads to reassurance. If you don't receive any of those things, you're likely to feel more mentally distressed, more isolated, and perhaps more anxious. And so I asked hundreds of individuals, how do you create a framework for mental wellness? And I used this neon triptych as a framework and a springboard, and then asked individuals to create collage, drawing, and text-based art for potential inclusion in pop-up exhibitions, and then to return publicly onto transit. So 3 works here. The middle one, mental illness, is like going into a bad neighborhood. You don't want to go there alone. Controversial work, it was an anonymous work. I can tell you though, from this being an applied research project, I did have a certificate of ethical approval that the individual that provided this text, it was from something his father used to say, and his father was a freedom fighter that provided informal counseling to other people involved in the Civil War. And yeah, the complaint that we received, fair comment, there does seem to be a bit of a stereotyping, but let's face it, some neighborhoods are better than others, and bad neighborhoods are likely to contribute for those that perhaps are more disadvantaged to a greater instance of mental health challenges. I'll let you read this work while I take a sip of water. Kai Corvella. I met him at one of my first workshops, didn't know the gentleman, introduced himself to me afterwards. Really apt work for Bell Let's Talk Day. I am not a pill, you are not a pill. Don't be judged by your medication. As mentioned at the outset, my work within the realm of community wellness and mental health, inspired by my own diagnosis with Tourette syndrome in my early 1940s. And I've subsequently been afforded the opportunity to go on and work with Kai. He's the executive director for OBAD, the Organization for Bipolar Affective Disorder. And I'm contracted as their artistic director to work with different communities on similar health-oriented mental wellness projects. Look at a couple of other images here. A student from the university here, I believe she's now an alumni, Sandra Kadim. You can see this billboard. If only you saw how strong you are. Great example of social practice. The you don't always see how strong you are. Others see you differently than you might feel. In terms of other groups remaining here in Calgary, Eric and me with the hunter-gatherer purveyor, hunting for flora within city settings and gathering them and then purveying them, invariably for free. And so they made these popsicles with different plants that were gathered in these different neighborhoods of Mount Denis, Malvern and Rosedale, and then made them available to individuals at a pop-up location downtown. And this brings us to our last category, and perhaps the most important, social prescriptions. And so in following this trajectory of art history and community and representation, what about the possibility that art really can be a literal prescription for wellness? So social prescribing, and I'll give you a reference here to the King's Fund in my next slide, is a process that enables GPs, doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals to refer patients, people, to a range of non-clinical services, and art activities are one of them. They're often in a group setting. Gardening would be another one. And if you Google the King's Fund out of the UK, you'll find out a lot more about social prescribing and some excellent reference material. But ultimately, growing out of the UK over the last 5 or 10 years, individuals are making multiple repeat visits to doctors, the same as in this country, for what often are not medical conditions. They're perhaps clinical mental health conditions. And it's a huge drain, both for the patients, of course, and for the health service. And so in the instance of those that may have some mild mental health symptom, be anxious or depressed, struggling to engage effectively with the services, they are given a prescription for Well, let's face it, maybe going to an art group, perhaps a walking group, a gym group, computerized CBT. That's not CBD, it's cognitive behavior therapy, I should indicate. Of course, an art group, stress control, the men's shed, build your own man cave. And I will highlight that that's not overtly gendered, beyond the fact that males are highly underserved when it comes to mental health. There are also some groups that are more female oriented. And so what we find is that this means of a prescription being given to an individual is that somebody may actually be able to get much better through what is not a medicalized solution. And that comes back to Bell Let's Talk in terms of reaching out, having the conversation, stigma reduction, workplace. I feel incredibly supported in my current workplace to be able to mount this kind of talk and this project, that we are part of a broader community. So how does social prescribing work? Well, beyond the first point with a doctor, then the real link is a community connector, sometimes known as a navigator, who will talk to somebody about what kind of social prescription is best for them based upon their interests. If you're not interested in gardening, you may not really want to join a gardening club, but if you are interested in art, you may feel much better going to some form of art class. And then the social prescription is produced with the aim of improving health and well-being. There's a lot of measurement that's going on at the moment, but one analysis has indicated that social prescribing could save as much money as 4,000 full-time doctors a year because of the reduction in the number of visits. So coming back to that artwork that I mentioned on the train, it's relevant that people with wider social issues such as housing challenges, debt and relationships have negative impacts on health and well-being. And it's these kind of people that find themselves making repeat visits to a doctor, even ending up at their local emergency department. They get trapped in a revolving door of services and they don't actually get what they want. For those that want to drill down further, the University of Westminster has a great reference for you. And this brings me to round out today's presentation on addressing the mental behind mental health and wellness for Bell Let's Talk Day. We might want to talk about mental health. We might want to talk about mental illness. Some people will talk about it as a disease, a disability, mental distress, mental wellness, mental well-being. It's important to choose the language that you're most comfortable with this. There isn't any one prescription for how we address the mental. I also want to finish up with addressing the role of flourishing through the work of Dr. Corey Keyes and You Flourish at the university. 5 tenets that I can give you as a takeaway to incorporate more into your life, that of learning, playing, interacting, connecting and helping. You engage in these on a regular basis, you can positively increase your mental health, regardless not of whether you've had a presence or absence of a mental health condition in the past. And what about Canada and the home front? That's where we're going to round out here. Well, there's a pilot study that's been underway for a couple of years in the East. Doctors are prescribing museum visits to patients to go to the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts as part of a social prescription. And here you can see a health worker, Tammy McAvoy, one of 15 health champions, working to help administer these social prescriptions of visiting galleries and art museums. I also want to finish off with the fact that for those that are interested in this topic further, I'm hosting another Bell Let's Talk Day event tonight. Here you can see the work of Mara and Kathleen Elliott, and there will be a presentation of artwork by myself for a show that I've curated up in Edmonton called Perspectives from Within. And there will be 2 presentations by 2 of the artists, Mara and Kathleen Elliott and also Wes Bell. And I was very happy, of course, to show you the front page of today's Calgary Herald. For those of you that actually take the print edition, you can find this pretty much full page feature article that talks about the presentation that's happening this evening and the work of OBAD and Site C projects to use art as a creative connector for wellness towards improving, let's face it, our own mental well-being through whatever prescription you choose. And without further ado, I will give you this slide. I'm not going to show the video, time pressing as it is, and it doesn't always work, but you could Google something like this and you will hear a great example of a patient's perspective from the United Kingdom. And I'll put that into the chat. And thank you very much.